Hello YouTube, this is UMills03. In the previous lesson, we introduced a new data structure called sets, called hash sets. And we basically said that a set is a data structure in Java that cannot contain any duplicate elements. So we're talking about basically a collection of elements where all the elements are unique. So if you were thinking about adding the word basketball to a set 266 times, you can go ahead and do that 266 times. But then when you print the set, you would only see the word basketball one time. So anyway, we've been talking about some more advanced data structures, and we've basically been looking at different things here. And so in the previous lesson, basically what we talked about is how we could basically do collections.sort of a particular array list or linked list, right? So collections.sort of array list or linked list, where the array list or linked list can have any object type whatsoever, whether it's a string or a person object or a point object or a toothpaste object. It can be anything you want as long as the class implements comparable and defines a valid compare to method. And so basically you could go ahead and print a sorted version of an array list or linked list, right? You could also get the minimum or maximum value by calling collections.min of my list and collections.max of my list. And we said basically if we import java.util.Iterator, then we can create an iterator object that we call on a particular array list or linked list. And then we can say while iterator.hasNext system.out.println of iterator.next, and that would refer to each of the elements in the array list or the linked list. And we said if we call iterator.remove, then that's a void method that would actually remove that particular element, the element that you just referred to with next, from the array list or linked list that the iterator is based on. So it would actually modify the array list or linked list by removing that element. And then we can generate a stack too. So we said a stack is a type of last in, first out data structure. So basically, the last elements that come into the stack are going to be the first one. The last are going to be the first ones that come out of the stack. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And so we can call push, right? And so you just say import java.util.stack at the top of your file, and then you create a stack object, and then you would say .push. So you'd say stack1.push of v1, and you would have to be able to push objects of the same data type as your stack is instructed to accept, right? So if it's instructed to accept egg objects, you need to push egg objects, right? And then we would say, so push is what adds onto the top of the stack, right? And then peek will look at the top of the stack without removing, and pop will look at the top of the stack and remove it. So it will return and remove the top of the stack. And we saw that in the previous video. And then we also have this search method, right? So if you see an egg at the very top of the stack, then the search method returns 1. If you see an egg 4 eggs down from the top, then it would return 4. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then we also talked about queues, and we said queues are different because while stacks are last in, first out, queues are first in, first out, So you can think about customers at a supermarket, right? Where it's the first people who show up in line are the first people who are going to get served by the staff agents, So you would say .add a v1, and you say queue of a queue of a particular type, and then the name of the queue, and then equals new linked list of the particular type. And then you would say, the name of that queue .add of, and then you could add objects onto the queue, right? And then you could just go ahead and make sure that that works. And then just like remember with arrays and linked lists, you can have iterators. Same thing with stacks and queues. You can have iterators, and you can iterate and see the elements in the stacks and the queues. And so you could say equals my queue.iterator and just make sure that all of the elements are in the queue that you expect to be there, right? And then you could also go ahead and peek at the queue. So that would just look at the front of the queue without removing that element. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then we can also have pull. So pull for a queue is kind of like pop for a stack, right? It returns and removes the head of the queue, So it's unlike peek, right? Peek just looks at the head of the queue, but pull looks at the head of the queue and removes it so that you'll eventually have a new head of the queue. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then in the previous video, we started talking about sets. So what we did is we said import java.util.HashSet. And so that's the line that we need to write on top of the file. And what we do is we say that a set can only have unique elements. And so basically what you would do is you would import java.util.HashSet and then create a particular set. And then what you would do is you could say basically set.add of element, right? And so you could basically add, so adds an element if and only if it does not already exist in the set, because if it exists in the set, then you would be adding a duplicate, and Java doesn't allow that. Okay, there's no horrible problem with it. You wouldn't get a runtime exception. It's just nothing would happen. So hopefully that makes sense to you, right? And then we talked about these different methods. So we can go ahead and pull that up. I don't know if I still have it up, but what you could do is you could go to HashMap Java API, and you could go ahead and remind yourself of some of the documentation, some of the methods that you have available to you. So you could go ahead and add an element, and then you can clear all the elements from the set. Okay, we talked about how we can do this with an array list or a linked list, but you can also do it with a set. So you could just say set.clear, and that would remove all elements from the set, right? You'd be like starting over, it'll be a blank slate. And you could see whether or not a set contains a particular element, right? Either it contains the element or it doesn't, right? We're talking about unique elements. So either the element is there uniquely exactly one time or it's not, right? There's also an isEmpty method. You can just see whether or not the set is empty, right? If it contains any elements, then isEmpty returns false. If it doesn't contain any elements, then isEmpty returns true, right? You can also remove an element from the set if the element is present, right? But if you try calling remove on remove of a particular element that was not already in the set, then nothing happens, right? It's sort of like if you were trying to add an element that was already in the set. Okay, and then the size method will return the number of unique elements in the set. Sometimes mathematicians call that its cardinality, but it'll be the number of unique elements in your set, right? And again, there's no duplicates. There's no notion of having 2 sevens or 2 instances of the word hot dog. You would just say hot dog, right? It's just a unique instance of a particular element, and that's how sets work. And you can go ahead and try that out. So we went ahead and tried adding an element 10 times, but then when we removed it once, it was gone, right? The it's hot falls out of the set, because no matter how many times you try adding it, it's just going to show up one time, right? And then if you remove February, even though February isn't there, there's no problem. It didn't error out or anything. It just doesn't do anything, right? And then we also talked about an iterator, and we said that we can also create an iterator object for a set. And this would allow you to look at all the words in the set, right? And you could basically go ahead and look at different things here. So what if you say unique words dot add of basketball, right? Just to have a couple more examples, and then you could say unique words dot add of ice cream, right? And then you can just make sure that those things would appear when you go ahead and iterate, right? But since you removed it's hot, then that would not appear in the set. Okay, no matter how many times you tried adding it ahead of time, you would not have 99 it's hots left. You would just have 0 because you removed the occurrence of it. There's only unique elements in a set. That's literally that's pretty much the most important thing you can know about a set, is that there are no duplicate elements allowed. So you would just say basketball, ice cream, summertime, August. And then what we did is we tried clearing the set at the end, and then tried seeing whether or not it's empty. And we said that the clear method will remove all elements from the set. So presumably the set would be empty after calling clear on it. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about a hash map. Okay, so basically a map is also another word for a map is a dictionary, but it's another type of advanced data structure. So we've already learned about multiple data structures, right? An array list, a linked list. We also talked about stacks and queues and sets. Okay, technically an iterator might be thought of as a data structure, but not really, okay? But I guess an iterator is sort of a mechanism for going over a data structure. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna think about a map, okay? We're gonna think about a map, which is also, I guess, called an associative array, okay? So it's also called an associative array, okay? But more often it's called a map, or in Python, it would be called a dictionary, okay? So we talk about dictionaries in my Python videos. And if you want to keep going with computer programming, you should watch my 55 Python tutorials. So dictionary is an abstract data type composed of a collection of key value pairs, such that each possible key appears at most once in the collection. So what we have to do is we have to think about a dictionary basically as being a set of partnerships, okay? So basically you're gonna have a set of keys. So you're gonna have unique keys. You can't have a key appear more than once, but you're gonna have a unique collection of keys. And each of those keys can map to exactly one value, okay? Now, 2 different keys can map to the same value, but you cannot have one key mapping to 2 different values, right? So the keys have to be unique, but the values don't have to be unique, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna think about these key value pairs, but just think about these partnerships, almost like husband and wife, or not really like that, but it would just be like a coupling, right? It was just like you stick a key, and a key is kind of like an input, and then outcomes of value. It's an output, it's a value associated with that output. If I stick a key into the dictionary, into the map, what value, what output do I get out? What value or output is associated with that key? And we're going to think about how to implement this in Java. Okay, so we can also look at one more Wikipedia article. We can look at something a little bit more specific, and it's a data structure that implements an associative array, a dictionary, or a map, which is a structure that can map keys to values. And so this is a hash map. This is what we're going to be looking at in this video. And so the next thing you need to look at is you would just go ahead and, and so this will probably go into a little bit more detail than you're interested in, but you have to think about these key value pairs, right? It's just going to be key value pairs. So now what you're going to do is you would go to blackhole.com and you could go ahead and look at the API for the HashMap class. So I have no idea how many classes we've already talked about in Java, right? We talked about probably dozens, probably 20 or 30 classes, right? String, scanner, Boolean, array list, collections, iterator, right? We talked about so darn many, thread, exception classes, file writer classes, all kinds, right? And so we're going to talk about a HashMap class now. And so this is a hash-based implementation of the map interface. And you have to think about key value pairs. And so you can think about a key value pair, and basically the formatting here is, remember when we were creating sets and stacks and queues, we were just passing in a particular type, right? So you could have a linked list of strings, or you could have an array list of integer objects, or you could have a stack of egg objects. But with the hash map, it's going to be a pairing between two object types. Okay, so the keys are going to be representing one data type. So maybe your keys will be integer objects, okay? And the values could be a different data type. So maybe the values will be strings. Maybe the values will be person objects. But the point is that the keys will be a particular object type, and the values will be another type of object. It will be another object type. And we have to think about some of the methods that we have available when we work with a map, when we work with a dictionary. So the first thing that you want to be familiar with is isEmpty, and we could just basically see whether or not the map contains no key value mappings. And if it does contain no key value mappings, then we would return true. So what we're going to do is we can go ahead, if you have any questions about the set functionality and stuff, you can post them below this video or look back at the previous video. But what we need to do, the first thing we need to do is import HashMap. So what you need to do is you need to say import java.util.HashMap, kind of like how we imported java.util.HashSet in the previous video. But what you have to understand is with a map, the keys form a set. So you have a set of keys. It's a unique collection of keys. You cannot have two different keys. You can't have two keys be the same, okay? All the keys have to be unique to each other, and they can map to the same value, right? You can have two different unique keys that have the same value, but you can't have two different values associated with the same key, right? The keys have to be unique, and every key only gets one value. But what you would do is you would say hash set A, okay, and then you would have a particular object type. So you could say let's do it with eggs and integers. So let's do it with integer or with strings and strings. Okay, so strings and strings. So we're just going to map a string onto another string, and you can just call it A, okay, equals new hash set. So the point is that you have to pass in two object types, okay? You could have your keys be egg objects and your values be integer objects, okay? You could have your keys be strings and your values be Boolean objects with a capital B, okay? But the point is that you would go ahead and have to, let's see, so it would be a hash map, right? Not a hash set. So it'd be a hash map, okay? But the point is that you would need an object type for both the keys, and then either the same object type or a different object type for your values, right? And then what you could do is you could basically see whether or not it's empty, right? So you could say a.isEmpty, and then what we can do is we can try to create key value pairs. And then what we're going to do for that is you're going to say the put function. So what you would do is you would go ahead and assign a value to a particular key. So it would say associate the specific value with the specified key in the map, and you would go ahead and create a relationship. You would say for this new key, I want to have this particular value. So you would say a.put of basically, you could say first month, and then maybe you would say January, okay? And then you could have another one. You could say a.put of last month, okay? And then you could say basically December, okay? And so basically it's just mapping one string to another string. It's having basically one string be an input or a key, and then the second string would be a value or an output. And then you could have 6 month, which is the month of my birthday, but that would be June. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you, but that's establishing key value relationships in your map, in your dictionary. And then the other thing that you can do is you can go ahead and replace a particular value associated with a key, but that would only go ahead and do a replacement if it's currently mapped to some value. So what we're going to do is we could say a.replace. What if we made a mistake and we said that the 6th month was April? But then what we're going to do is we're going to replace the value associated with the key 6th month with the proper 6th month, with the proper value, right? And then what we could do is we could say a.replace of 7th month with July. So what this does is it only makes the replacement if it's currently being mapped to some value, right? But then what you could also do is there's also an overloaded replace method, which will give you a new value if there is an old value there. So hopefully that makes sense to you. But this would only make a replacement if it's being mapped to something already. But you can go ahead and study the functionality here. But the point is that you can add key value pairs, and you can also remove a particular key value pair, right? So if you had a particular key that you no longer wanted associated to a value, you could go ahead and remove that. But you can go ahead and do a replacement. So we can go ahead and say a.replace, right? And then we could also say put if absent, right? So we could also say put if absent, but this would go ahead and, there's different ways to go ahead and establish these key value relationships, right? And then we could also say .get, okay? So .get would give you the value associated with a particular key. So we can go ahead and try some of these things out, but what we would want to do is go ahead and just look at all of the different values here. So what we could do is we could look at the different values. So we could say system.out.println of a.get of 1st month, right? And then you could basically see, a value associated with a particular key. So for example, you would say map.get of x basically returns the value that is mapped to or associated with key x. So hopefully that makes sense to you. But then if you go ahead and run it, hopefully we would see January printed on the console, because that's the value that's associated with that particular key. And so you would get January, and true is printed on the console because the map starts out as empty, right? And then what if you had said 6th month here? So here, remember, the value that we initially assigned to the key 6th month was April, but then we called the replace method and we went ahead and replaced it. So now if we go ahead and run the main method, and then we can go ahead and look at the terminal window, but you get June, because we ran the replace method, right? And just on your own, hopefully you're familiar enough after 55 lessons with going into an API yourself and trying different things. So you could see whether or not a dictionary, or you could see whether or not a dictionary or map contains a particular key. So what if I wanted to see if a key or a value existed within a dictionary, right? So this is another thing you could do, but there's just all this functionality that you can try out. So what if you said system.out.println is basically December in the map. Okay, so we could see if that's one of the values in our dictionary. So what we could do is we could say a.contains value of, and then December, right? This is an instance method, contains values, an instance method that is called on a particular instance, right? It's called on a particular hash map, and you pass in a value or a key, right? Key if you call contains key, and a value if you call contains value, and it just returns true or false whether or not there's that key or value somewhere in the dictionary, right? So then if you go ahead and run this code, you would see that you would get, yeah, it is in the map. December is in the map. So hopefully that makes sense to you. But then if you said a.contains value of, and then what if you said last month? Well, here last month would be a key, but last month is not a value. So here we would be expecting false because last month is a key, not a value. So for example, so then if you go ahead and run this line of code, and again, the console window is gonna hide, but you would see false printed for that Boolean. So the point is that a map or a dictionary, you have different key value pairs, right? And you use put to establish a key value relationship, and you can use remove to basically remove a key value relationship. You'd say .remove of, and then specify key, and it would eliminate that key value relationship. But the point is that you have like an input key and an output value, and it's up to you but you have to basically specify a data type for your keys and a data type for your values. And it's a relationship like an input output, and you get to establish what those relationships are going to be. So hopefully you enjoyed learning about that. And from UMills 03, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.